One in Three is intended for mature audiences. Episodes contain explicit content and may be triggering as they often include violence and other varying forms of abuse such as emotional, psychological, sexual, and physical. In most cases, names have been changed to protect all involved. Please note, statements and opinions of guests do not necessarily reflect those of my own. Hi, warriors. Welcome to One in Three. I'm your host, Ingrid. Domestic abuse can show up in many forms: childhood abuse, intimate partner violence, and even spiritual manipulation, to name a few. But at its core, it's always about power and control. My guest today survived all three. His story reveals the patterns, the impact, and ultimately, the hope that follows. Please welcome Tom. Hi, Tom. Welcome to One in Three. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
So we have quite a story. I guess it's almost multiple stories all rolled into one. But before we get into all of that, could you please just share a background with us so we can get to know you a little bit?
Sure. Well, I was, raised in regular denominational churches. And at age 14 to 16, I faced life-threatening situations that didn't help because I hadn't really met the Lord yet in a personal way. And at 14, I was doing experiments. I was playing around with asbestos. This is back in the 60s. And I had studied, in school, we learned about the dangers of asbestos, and the scientific and medical community knew. But I looked at that and I said, hey, aren't car brake shoes made of asbestos? And, I looked at that problem and I said, you know what, I'm going to create a solution. I'm going to create an invention. I was in school. I had the ego and pride. I wanted to win my school science fair all the way up to state science fair. And really, big part of it was I had to please my father. My father and mother, no one in the family, I had two older brothers, showed love. My mother did. She was the only source of love, right? But I mean, my father and brothers, no. And my father, if he wasn't angry at you, then you knew you were loved. But my father was a double major engineer, and he always had to prove to him that I was worthy. He didn't take you fishing, didn't play ball. You don't get kudos from that. I had to sit at the kitchen table and every open waking hour study math and engineering at his hand. But that's how you got your father's attention, right? You do what you got to do. And so, now I had a chance to create this invention. My father had patent, inventions, and I wanted to do mine and compete against him. So, but I saw this problem and I designed a system that would go around each brake drum area of each wheel. And as you drove down the road, the wind would blow through. It'd be a sealed environment, pick it up and put it into a bag in the back that could be disposed of. So I created the design, I built the unit. You can't test it with sawdust because sawdust doesn't weigh the same. So I went to the brake shops and they would have tons of brake dust laying all over the shop. Asked if I can have it. They're like, here's a broom, have at it. Take as much as you want, because it was just a mess they're going to have to clean up. And so I run it through my system and prove that the system worked. And of course, in the beginning, it wasn't very sealed perfect. So I'd have mounds of asbestos dust flying in the air while I'm proving that I can gather it out of the system. So my mother and father worked 16-hour days. She'd come downstairs in the basement where I had my creation, and I'd be showing it to her all proud, and she would just cheer. She was my cheerleader. And, that was all great until a year later when she gets cancer. And the cancer riddles through her whole body. She has a hysterectomy, a double mastectomy. It goes into her lymph nodes, settles into her liver, and she dies. And now, all of a sudden, my state science fair win, my ego of an invention that was patent pending, didn't mean a thing. Pleasing my father didn't mean a thing, because I had the guilt of the world that I had just killed my mother, that it was my fault playing with asbestos dust. My ego was so big, and having to please my father was so important that I didn't think about the ill effects that would happen to my mother. So about a month later, I noticed a rock hard tumor about the size of a walnut in my gut, in my abdomen. And I knew because I knew because I knew I had cancer, that I had the same cancer in the liver. And you know what? I thought, I deserve it. I'm the idiot who just killed my mother for my ego and my pride to please my father. So I deserve to die. And so I wouldn't tell anybody. And I just was going to own it, die at 15, and that's it. Every time I'd come home from high school alone at home, my brothers are gone in college in the military, my father working 16-hour days. So I'd come home alone and I would sit in the family room, close my eyes, and I'd see a vision of cloud puffs going from one end of the horizon to the other. And on top of every cloud puff was a scene in life. And I'd watch those scenes in life. And the problem was they were all without me. About this point, that little tumor had grown about the size of a softball, hard as a rock in my abdomen. I'm not going to tell anybody. It's probably 6 months later. And I wasn't going to, but I turned 16. I wanted a motorcycle. I wanted to have my father get me one. And so I thought if I could ride and the wind's blowing in my face, I'd feel free. So to get that motorcycle, I had to get a job. Only way my father would pay for it. To do that, I had to get a food handler's permit. And only job available in 1970 was fast food. And so I went to the county clinic. I knew if to do that that my secret would be out, because the county does two things. It does a full chest x-ray, and then it took a blood sample to make sure you don't have communicable disease. The next week, my food handler's permit comes in the mail, and about a week later, came home from school one day. My father's car was in the drive, never home early, middle of the day. And I come walking in the door, but before I walked in, I knew that he had gotten the letter telling about my cancer. And as I walked in the door, I walked into the living room, and it's 80 some degree in April in Ohio, and my father's burning a fire in the fireplace. Now, he loves fires in the fireplace, but that's a nighttime thing, when it cools down. Middle of the day, 80 degrees, And as soon as I walked in, he flips a letter in his hand into the fire. And I knew what it was. And I said, "What are you doing?" "Oh, I just burning trash." "Why? Why in the middle of the day? Why now?" And, "Oh, I just wanted to get rid of trash." We didn't have to burn trash. And I said, "Was that a letter in your hand?" No, 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 no. And all of a sudden I'm thinking, I've known for 6 or 7 months. He just found out his wife, my mother, just died 7 months ago. Now he just found out his youngest son is dying. Give him a minute, let him think about it. About a week later, I come walking in from school. My father's car's in the drive again, another car's in there. And I come walking in, and he says, "Tommy, come in the living room." And he had 2 insurance agents there. He takes out a multi-million-dollar policy on me, life insurance policy. What in the HE double hockey sticks are you doing? Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? So at this point, I'm now full of anger, hating him. I mean, he didn't Yeah, it's one thing if he had maybe taken out a policy just big enough to bury me, few grand and maybe enough to buy a case of beer. Okay, fine. Multi-millions, that's what it's worth in today's money. Along the way in there, I met the Lord through all this trauma. I had a personal relationship with him, and I went haywire after my father did this for the next 8 months. I sold everything I had and everything he had, and I bought a Harley in boxes, an old 49 Harley, and I built it into a chopper. I'm 16 years old. I turn into a hippie scuzzball gang writer. I actually started writing with the Hells Angels on my chopper. I became the second biggest drinker in my school. So I'm living with tremendous hate of myself, of my father, of the situation. And I literally was planning on blackmailing him. My real plan was I was going to drive to the Grand Canyon. I wasn't just driving to California. I was stopping at the Grand Canyon because my plan was I was going to drive it off. I was going to pull an Evel Knievel and I was going to drive it off to my death because I not only deserve to die, but if I'm going to die, I just want to choose how I go. So now I'm not only a rage filled biker, teenage alcoholic, I'm also suicidal. My plan was also, the devious plan would be to have written a letter, tucked it inside my clothes, pinned it in there, so that when they picked up the pieces at the bottom, the letter would tell about my father's insurance fraud, and he'd lose the whole payout. But the third pain is I wanted him to go to jail. I mean, that's how much hate and anger and rage I was full of. So, wonderful story in there. Well, at the end of 8 months, I was sitting there with my biker buddy gang one night, and we were drinking bottle after bottle of cheap wine. And we got into discussions. That's normal. But we got into a spiritual discussion, which wasn't normal. I told him my story, and I said, I asked the Lord to come my life, and he didn't. And in the moment I said that, something inside of me broke loose. And I knew I was wrong. And all of a sudden, the Lord, the Holy Spirit, and somehow it broke through all my hatred, anger, guilt, broke past that. And all of a sudden, I had the peace of God that was beyond comprehension. And I knew his love. And all of a sudden, I was sobered, and I knew what I was saying was wrong. And my life changed from that day forward. 1971, Jesus freak. And I was telling everybody about the love of God. So that was my change. It was in the charismatic move. I was in there from 71 to 77 when it ended. I actually knew I was dying all along, right? Now I knew where I was going, and I was no longer afraid. So I was riding home one night on my motorcycle and talking to the Lord just like normal. And as I was riding home, the Lord said, well, do you see in 1 Peter where I said, by his wounds you were healed? I went, yeah. He says, would you like that healing? I went, I don't care. I'm nonchalant. Like, I'm ready to go home. In that moment, I felt a change. And within 24 hours, the rock hard tumor that had grown from the size of the walnut to now it was larger than a football, hard as a rock in my abdomen, within 24 hours melded and dissipated.
That's huge. I mean, it's actually literally huge and huge that it went away.
Yeah.
Well, okay. So all of that has a really good background, and there's almost like foreshadowing in your own life as to what is to come. I think it's very common for individuals who have experienced some form of abuse to then end up in another situation where they are abused again, and it may be a different form of abuse, which is actually what you ended up encountering.
Unfortunately, I have a history, and I guess the bad, looking for bad follows for bad. And I wasn't never looking for it. I never looked for it, but Seems like it always found me.
Do you feel up to getting into a little bit of those
Sure.
stories because there's more than one?
Right. Well, the next one would be talking about my marriage, first marriage. Um, she was a young lady in the same church, and we're all going through seeing the miracle power of God. And, we're both believers, but that doesn't preclude that people can have mental issues and they need help and treatment. And if they don't ask for it or get help, it's bad. And so, I married her and we had 4 children, but most of my life with her was hell. I used to call her the Queen of Bees, uh, I, because I lived abuse 24/7, 365, um, physical, verbal abuse, physical abuse, mental abuse. Um, and she did it in front of the kids. Like, it didn't matter. And uh, she would be, we used to have what we called Saturday night at the fights, because every Saturday we'd be up almost all night fighting. And by the way, I hated fighting. I didn't want to fight. And she would do anything to make me fight. I would say, I'm not going to fight. And I'd go lay down on the couch. She'd walk over with a 32-ounce glass of soda pop and ice and dump it all over my head to get me to get up and fight. She would physically hit me all the time. I wouldn't hit her back. And she would throw potted plants at me. And I mean monster pots. We had a banana tree. She took a kitchen chair and threw it at me. And, I was a pretty big guy. I'd knocked it off. But, you know, you can only have so much fun, and I wasn't having it. And, it was just mental abuse and always nagging, always accusing. I didn't never made enough money, even though I was an engineer at Bell Labs, AT&T Bell Labs. So, she wanted me to get a second job. Well, instead of that, I could work overtime and get paid more, get paid double time. So I used to work 80 to 100-hour weeks for Bell Labs as an engineer, just so she had the money so she wouldn't bitch more. And that still was not enough, because then she would accuse me of, you're gone all the time, so you must be having affairs. Because I heard somewhere that if you think your husband's having an affair, then that's the truth because you thought it. I found out from one of my older daughters later years after I left my wife that she had hired a private detective to follow me. Because after being at Bell Labs, then I started my own business. And then I was working 80-hour weeks as a hardware and software designer, running my own company, which I did for 45 years. And she, at that point, knew I was having an affair. So she would, she hired a private detective to find out all my dirt. You know what the worst dirt was? My assistant pastor of the church we were in was worked the next building over in the office buildings, and we would go out every Wednesday for the Wednesday matinee movie, because we would go grab Taco Bell and go grab a matinee, because it was our break for our sanity breaks. and and so we had a 2-hour movie where we were at, and she's like, that was the worst dirt she could find. So, I mean, living under this mental abuse, and I took it and took it. She said, we need to go to counseling because it's all your fault. And if we go to counseling, the counselors are going to just deal with you. And I didn't like that thought, but I'm like, you know what? Fine. Let's go to counseling. So I went to counseling. I didn't fight it. And she starts out and she's telling the counselors how horrid I am. And she's expecting them to jump all over me. And all of a sudden it changed. And all they did was focus on her. And they wouldn't stop focusing on her because they could see right through her. And she then she's done with counseling because they don't know nothing. And everyone at church thought, she's just the best thing since sliced bread and butter because she puts on such Sunday smile, such the facade. And as we're going to church, as I told you, we had to have Saturday night the fights, and come in the morning as we're driving to church, she would, and even though I'm a strong guy, but I'm not abusive. And she's just as strong-willed, but she was abusive. As we're driving down the road, she would command me and the children that you are not to speak a word about what happens behind closed doors. And when we walk into church, you just smile and everything is just peachy king. And nobody knew the better. And actually, the assistant pastor that I used to go to movies with, we'd ride motorcycles together. And I would tell him of the abuse I went through, and he'd be like, I don't see that. She is so nice. All we do is see this nice person. And, you probably have it kind of mixed up, Tom. I mean, everybody gets their perspective, right? And here's a guy, he's my best friend, and he doesn't believe me. And so one day he drove out to my house. Usually we'd meet somewhere, but he drove out there and it was out in the country. And he comes up and he comes in, and Kathy starts riddling me in front of him, something he'd never seen before. And she lets loose on why should I get to go motorcycle riding because she's stuck at home. Yeah, I let you have a life. You don't have to work, outside the home. We had children and foster children. And so I'd let her keep all the foster money to run for her own fun, and I'd pay the bills. And she just belittling me. And she did it in front of Chuck. And he saw for the first time who she really was. And he said, Tom, I don't know how in the hell you live with this. How have you lived with this? He says, I'm sorry, I didn't believe you. I should have listened. And so
Did she know that he was there? Did she see him?
Oh, he was right there. He came in
That's so weird.
to say hi to her, and she's sitting at the kitchen table, and I'm like, okay, well, I'm getting ready to leave with Chuck. She lost her cookie. She couldn't handle that I was going riding on a Saturday afternoon and leaving her alone with the children.
That's so surprising. Usually they try to keep that front up for everybody.
Like she was Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and Mr. Hyde came out a lot.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of personality disorders that she probably could fit, but obviously you didn't see that either because you wouldn't have married her if you would have known that was what she was truly like. I'm assuming she had that front up for you for a while.
Here's the funny thing. She had was when we were growing up in the charismatic move, our family lives weren't that great at home, right? So we kind of gained spiritual parents. There were people who kind of just adopted us like they were our spiritual mother and father, right? Different, like I had mine, she had hers, right? And they're just people who, it's kind of like good people who help you, right? As you're going through. And her spiritual parents talked to me after we were, planned to get married, and they had a powwow with just me, and they said, do you really know who she is? Do you really know what you're getting into? Well, I'm 19 and I just think I know everything and I'm in love. So I didn't listen. And they were warning me. They knew who she really was. And that's at 19.
Well, yeah. And so I also wanted to point out the whole therapy thing. That's one thing that they do like to do. They like to go to therapy, couples therapy, because that is where they accuse you of all of these things. And if you don't have a good therapist that can see through this behavior, they validate the abuse by saying, right, oh, you both need to work on things. So you're also assuming some responsibility of the abuse. Okay. So
I was actually going in like, hey, maybe I'm the problem. So I'll listen to the counselors, and if they want to tell me I'm 50% or I'm 100%, I'll be there. Like I want to save our marriage. I'd like to have a nice life. And it was the funniest thing because they could see right through her and they
Yeah.
called her out on her stuff. There were like, I think there were 2 or 3 counselors in this
Oh,
meeting and
wow.
they just called her out. And
Okay.
it was very reassuring for that I wasn't the crazy one.
Yes. Okay. So then how much longer after Chuck, that's his name, right? I got the right name.
Chuck.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how much longer after Chuck witnessed it did you eventually end the marriage?
Very, very shortly. Um, it was it was all coming to a head, and I was really only staying with her until we had our 4 children, till the youngest graduated high school. It was right around 2000 when we were having Y2K coming up, and I'm a computer expert. This is my whole world is IT, and I'm thinking, I don't want my family stuck here. I don't think the whole world's going to crash at Y2K. I don't really believe that. I think it could mess up a few things, sure, but I didn't want to leave them hanging. So my youngest had just graduated the uh, spring before. Now I'm going to wait through Y2K, get through that, and then I had the discussion with her that I was leaving. And we had talked divorce years, all through the years, right? And she, her thing was, God's against divorce, and your life will be over, and he'll never honor you again, and la 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 la, and you'll be out of ministry, and all this stuff. And I'd been in ministry and working with leaders for years, and she's using stuff, and then she's like, well, and we were talking divorce. She'd be, if you leave me, I'll make sure you never get to see your kids again. Well, I loved my kids. I gave my life for them. I would do special, we had special days every month, every weekend. I would give them each one an individual date. I'd take all 4 of them. We'd go have what we called, our crazy day out. We'd go do crazy fun stuff. And, I love my kids. And so she knew how to hurt me, you know. Well, I'll take the kids and you'll never get them. And you'll be out of ministry. Well, I don't care about ministry that much because, what I'm saying, we'll talk about that in a few minutes, but that didn't rule my life, but trying to tell me that she'll keep me from my kids, and she's such a manipulative person, and she's actually brilliant, she's very smart. So she knew how to play things, and she'd be one to lie and win. And so that kept me there. I'm waiting till my youngest one graduates. Well, that's 99. Well, now Y2K is coming up. I'm going to wait. I just have to protect the family. This is protective mode. So in January, right past that, I told her, I said, I'm leaving. And she's like, no, you're not leaving. I said, no, really, it's over. No, I'm done. And she argued with me and threatened. And it's like, you can't threaten with the kids anymore. And you think my ministry's over? I don't care. I don't live for ministry. And, I don't know what you can threaten me with. So this was just shortly after Chuck and I went riding that time. Well, I woke up the next morning after telling her, and I'm laying in bed, and in our room, I see her standing at the back of the bed with her hands behind her back, just staring at me. And I, wake up and I'm like, what are you doing? And she goes, I've just been standing here all night trying to decide. And her hands come in front of her and she's holding the biggest butcher knife we own. She says, I was just trying to decide how many times I was going to stab you to death. She had stood there all
Oh,
night. So I immediately left. I got an apartment and moved
oh
out.
my gosh. Oh my gosh. Well, statistically, when you leave a relationship or tell your abuser that you are leaving the relationship, that's the most dangerous point in your life because all the manipulation and all the little pieces of control that they used against you come crashing down. You're now leaving. It doesn't work anymore. So they have to pull out all the stops. So, yeah, actually, that's super creepy, but it also doesn't surprise me because that's the next level. That's the next step, right?
Right. And here's the thing. I believed her. I'd been physically
Yeah.
abused for 26 years. I made a joke. I was going to start Abused Husband Anonymous, because how many other men get abused? We know about women abuse. Like I personally abhor anybody ever hitting a woman or a child. I mean, I spank my children. That's not what I'm saying. I'm talking about hitting. I'm talking about abuse. And I'm against that, and 100%. So but I took it. But it's horrible when it happens to a woman. How many men, and how many even know that it happens to men? Back in that day,
Right.
not many.
Well, it's like the statistics are terrible for women, but then realizing that those statistics aren't even accurate because, like, for me, I never reported my abuse, so I don't fall into the statistics. And to understand that men are, I mean, if women aren't talking about it, there's such a bigger stigma for men to mention abuse because,
Mm-hmm.
like you said, you're telling your best friend what's going on and he's not believing you, and he's your
Right.
best friend. So
I
there's
know.
that whole, it's difficult, I think, for people to believe anyone who says they've been abused because a lot of times those abusers are very charismatic and they have this great mask and this great front that they're able to put on for anybody, and they can turn that switch on and off just like that.
Mm-hmm.
But it's harder for people, I believe, to comprehend that a man can be abused, and absolutely they can be. And I think there are a significant amount of men who have
Mm-hmm.
been abused physically, yes, definitely emotionally as well, and psychologically,
Mm-hmm.
financially, legally, all those things.
Yep. I'm sure there's a lot more. And like you say, when
Yeah.
you tell your best friend and he doesn't believe you, he's just like, Tom, you're probably just, I'm sure she has her moments, and I'm sure you're just exaggerating because that moment just messed you up. But boy, she let out all stops that day. Her mask was down, and he saw the true Mrs. Hyde. And we drove away, and he goes, I don't know how in the hell you lived with her. I should have believed you. That, you were never lying to me. Because he says, I just saw this one. And it was probably, he came over and it probably turned to an hour rant. It's like she wouldn't let us leave. That's how abusive
Wow.
she was.
Well, okay. So I don't want to say this as in like, because I think any parent that abuses the other parent automatically is an abusive parent, whether they're directly involving the children or not. They're an unfit parent. They're a bad parent. But did she ever? I mean, you were saying on the way to church, she would tell the kids not to say anything. So the abuse would happen in front of them. Would she involve them directly as well?
Yeah, she actually, the mask was off at home. Sure, when they went to bed, went upstairs to go to sleep, it got louder and worse, you know, but they're not asleep and they're upstairs listening to every bit of it. And no, but they lived with her abuse. She hurt Mark, my oldest, a lot. Now he's ADHD, and that H factor was big. I have 3 out of my 4 are ADD. Of course, I am adult ADD. I found out I was ADHD when I was a kid. They had no diagnosis for that, but people told me how I acted, how hyper I was. But I'm an adult ADD, and so I relate to all the ADD problems. And uh, 3 of my 4 have that, and 2 of them have the H component. And Mark had it the worst, and he was the most abusive child. But she was abusing him. She would hurt him, and I'd have to intervene to stop. Like, I'm not afraid. I'll take the hits. Okay. Like, I won't let her hurt him, you know. And so, and even worse, we became foster parents to abused children, to we took in the toughest kids just shy of them being put into a mental institution. Like, we took the hardest of the children. Now, maybe it's because we could relate to it. Maybe it's because I told her she got to keep all the money, and you get the most money when you take care of the really difficult children that are just below going into an institution. I don't know. I have a heart for kids, so I wanted to help kids. And the more abused they were, my heart broke. Okay. So I hope she had some of that care, but she abused the foster children. And I would have to stop her, and I would threaten, you know. And if you don't stop this, I'll tell them, and you'll lose all that foster money. She was making 70 grand a year cleared from the government because we usually have 4 foster children at a time, and in the difficult ones, and there's no taxes on foster money. So she'd have 70 grand to live high on the hog, and I'm paying the bills. Oh, but I'm out there working to cheat on her. That's what she'd say. So couldn't win.
What happened to your kids when you got divorced?
You know, the thing is, I thought for sure they would appreciate that I stayed there for them, that I was the one intervening, stepping in. I'd take the abuse. I'd stop her. I mean, I'm physically big enough to stop her, right? I wouldn't hurt her back, but I can stop her. And, you know, if she throws a punch and hits me, and I take it, that's not I cared more about the kids, right? And so I'm thinking they're going to appreciate that I paid the price here. Well, she is a manipulator. And I think when you're under abuse, you become a Stockholm receiver of the abuse. Mark became an abuser. He abused his 3 brothers and sisters. I mean, he was so bad, we had to put him into a boys, don't call it boys industrial school, but it was a ranch where troubled kids had to go to, you know, and they are under strict guards and can't leave. And, you know, he had to be there for a year and a half just to calm down. He was so abusive. I mean, it was, you know, this is not a cult thing. This is like a place where you send kids to help them. And so, you know, it gets passed down through from the parent to the child. And you know, it was a terrible thing. But I'm thinking, well, you know, when I leave now, Mark's out of that place, out of that school, he's back, he's doing better, and I'm thinking, you know, they'll all appreciate. And when I told them that I was leaving their mother, they they threw a fit. They came to her rescue. They were, you know, you're wrong. You can't do that. You can't leave us. And I said, but I was here for you. And we can have 2 homes. You can come, you know, you're all grown now. I mean, you know, my oldest son's living on his own. The 2 daughters in the middle were in college, living in college away. And my youngest was at home with mama, but he's 18. He doesn't have to, you know, he can move out. But he was also mama's little baby. And mama had him twisted around her finger, just like she had all the church people. And she manipulates so hard. They didn't even believe she was abusive. And they lived under the abuse and they heard the abuse and they didn't believe she's abusive. And they thought I was wrong for leaving. And I told my 2 oldest sons, they came over to my office one day and were just like trying to talk me out of it. And, you know, because I already left. I was already had an apartment. And they're like trying to talk me out of this whole thing. And I said, you don't understand the abuse I've lived under. And I said, I actually got to the point where I was ready to just end it. If I didn't leave her, I was going to take a car or motorcycle and go drive it into a tree and be done. Like, that's the level of mental abuse. And I don't think I'm really a suicidal person. I think you got to be pushed really hard, like I was at 16, you know, like I don't live thinking suicide, but there was 16 and the circumstances, it was bad. And this is now 26 years of abuse. And I'm like, if I don't leave, I will die. And so I told him, I said, I really contemplated killing myself. And here's what both my boys said: "We wish you had."
No. Oh my
Broke my heart.
gosh.
They wished I had.
Ugh.
So my wife, ex-wife, not only had them all twisted up, living under that abuse, Stockholm syndrome people, young people that grew up under that, but then, it's like, and they hated me. Here I am doing all this for them. I'm like, wondering, why in the heck did I do this? I should have left when they were young. We would have had two households, and my wife, we'd fight court battles on who gets custody or how much. But like, I lived through all this hell just for you kids, and this is what you think? And my daughters, I don't know if they hated me, but they sure didn't like me. And it took years before those four relationships got back.
Like, how did you, I don't even know how you go about fixing that without, that's so difficult.
You got to love them at a distance. You got to keep
Mm-hmm.
telling them you love them, that it's okay if they love their mother too. It's okay that, they think she's the best thing since sliced bread and butter. That's not what I experienced. And I told them, I said, I know you heard a lot that wasn't good, but under Stockholm syndrome, they just ignored that. And so it just took time and just having to rebuild slowly. But then all it
Mm-hmm.
takes is one little stupid thing that happens between us, and they'll go haywire and may not talk to me for a year. You know, so it doesn't take much. They've been deeply hurt. It's taking
Yeah.
a lot of time.
Did they ever realize their mom, the level of emotionally abusive their mom is?
They've never
No.
admitted that to me, and as far as I
Mm-hmm.
know, they don't perceive that they still think she's in the right and I was in the wrong. And they have this great relationship. Caleb, my youngest, stayed at home, and he was mama's boy. And, it was the worst hate from him for many years because she had him so twisted around her little finger. But, Mark should have known a whole lot better because he was abused by her. And I think he was probably the first to come back to me. And it actually, they're all grown now, my four from her with her. I have a 12-year-old daughter with my new wife. My new wife's wonderful. She's not abusive. And I tell her that on her
Yay.
worst day in the last 20 years we've been together is better than the best day I ever had with Kathy.
Oh,
So I
gosh.
always give her that compliment because that's how
Yeah.
night and day different she is. So I have a 12-year-old with her. But the first four, Mark was the first one. All four of them are married now. And Mark, a couple years ago, got a divorce. And he carried over a lot of issues against women. You know, he I would just say that I don't think he ever abused, but I think he's a misogynist, and but I mean, he tried, and I don't know how much help he's gotten. Well, we all live in different parts of the country, but we talk on a regular basis. And 2 years ago, when he went through a divorce with his wife because they just weren't compatible, and they actually got along great, you know, surfacely. Don't know anything behind the scenes. But he finally, and then when he left her and she was loved by my other kids, they condemned him for leaving his wife, just like they condemned me. And he came to me and he says, "You know what? Now I know what you went through. And now I understand the pain you've been talking about. And now I understand when people don't love you or believe you." And he really apologized. It meant the world.
Yeah. I bet. That's so much trauma to go through. And then to have your kid's best interest at heart the whole time. And then to just feel that emotional letdown. But then for them to come back, I mean, that's just such a roller coaster ride.
Mm-hmm. It is.
My
And
gosh.
all the relationships are good, but I think the most strained is still the youngest, Caleb. And he's 40 now or whatever. And he still hasn't outgrown it, you know. And
Yeah.
so we get along, but he doesn't always forgive me. That's not a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah. That's hard. That's the ripple effect, I guess, of abuse, and how it affects the kids, and it goes into their relationships as they grow as well.
Mm-hmm.
That's tough. That's very
Mm-hmm.
tough.
It is.
Um, and that's not it. That's not all you had, is it?
No. No, I mean, I'm just a pincushion looking for more abuse in life, I guess. And so, as I said, I grew up in the charismatic move, and I ended up getting into ministry. I watched the charismatic move end in '77 because they wanted to split into two denominations, and my spiritual father said, which one are you going to join? And I'm like, neither. And he goes, why not? I go, because they're missing the point. We had the power of God, and now you want to turn it into rules and create these precepts and these rules that control people, and you want to quantify the power of God and kill the movement, which it did. And I said, and by the way, I said, from now on, this day forward, I never want to be called a charismatic again. He says, well, what are you? I said, I'm a Christian. That's all I am. And I've never been part of any denomination or religion ever since. I asked Claude AI the other day, I said, how many denominations are there in the world? All right, I figure there's, a couple dozen major religions, right? And there might be hundreds of denominations because the Christian church splits up. There might be hundreds of denominations. Claude came back and said, as of 2024, there are between 47,000 and 49,000 denominations.
Whoa. I never would have guessed that.
Would have never guessed it. Estimated to be 64,000 denominations by 2030. So you have all these church splits, right? Because one says, we're right, you're wrong. We're right, you're wrong. No, we're right. No, we're right. Oh, who's right? The Baptist, the Pentecostal, the Charismatic, the Lutheran, the Episcopal, no, none of them. I don't care about ministry. I care about the truth. So for the next 2 weeks, he preached I was a heretic and kicked me out of the church. I'd say that's an isolated incident, but later on down the road, same thing repeated itself again. I'm just a glutton for that punishment. And once again, when you work with the leader and they're all great, and then you stand up and publicly don't back them, I got called a heretic, preaching heresy again, and kicked out of 2 churches. Of course, then I just quit going to church for a long time. You can only take so much abuse. So this is church abuse, leadership abuse. I talk about it a lot in my second book called Set the Captives Free. There's ways to come through this. You've got to learn. You can get healed. I feel like I've been healed deeply on every front of issue I've mentioned to you all today. But it's a lot of stuff to go through for anybody. And I feel for anybody who goes through their traumas and their abuses.
Yeah. And I mean, you've been through like every form of abuse that you can have. So, okay, if people want to get your book or if they want to get in touch with you, how do they do that?
Okay. Hopefully, I can give it to you in email and you can add it to your show notes. My website is justtobeclear.com. It's the number 2. So just number 2, beclear.com. There I talk about my 2 books I've published and the next about dozen I have one that's about ready to be released, a third one. They've all been written here in the last year. Um, and I have, like I said, I have probably another 10, 12 that are, I give hints to what they are. So you can learn a little bit about the books at the website. You can click out from there to go to Amazon. You can find both books on Amazon. I'll give you the links to the Amazon in here. And then I also have a Substack that I can give, which is where I do blog posts, or like when I'm on podcasts like this one, I'll post the podcast there. I also have Instagram and Facebook. So I'll just give you all those links.
Okay. Yeah, great. I'll have all those in the show notes. So just wrapping up, do you have any lasting words of wisdom or encouragement that you would want to leave with listeners after hearing all of this?
Well, I would say there's hope. And I'd say life can be hell, and you can't circumvent what you have to go through, right? And everybody's going to have their own trauma and their own life and sometimes abuses that they have to go through. But everybody has usually some kind of trauma. And there's hope. And there's hope, but the one hope is in truly in the Lord. And I think, he's the one, he's my mainstay. It's a deep, personal, intimate relationship with Papa God. You don't have to. I don't clasp my hands and carry on and do all the. No, it's an intimate relationship, a personal relationship with a best friend who you can walk with every day. And if you can get that place, you can get through anything. You've heard the hell I've gone through, and I've gone to hell and back good number of times here. And I'm just telling you that I don't feel hurt for it. I don't feel pain. Life's hard, and we got to walk through it. And you're going to go to hell and back a few times. But if you have, it's kind of like the picture, the old picture of two footprints in the sand, that poem. And you got two footprints walking along, and then all of a sudden there's only one set of footprints. And then the poem, the guy goes, "So what, did you leave me during those times?" And the Lord says, "No, that's when I was carrying you."
Well, thank you, Tom. That was great. I appreciate your
Thank you.
time and your words.
Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you again, Tom, for joining me. And thank you, warriors, for listening. I've included the links Tom was referring to, as well as his 1 in 3 profile, in the show notes. I will be back next week with another episode for you. Until then, stay strong. And wherever you are in your journey, always remember, you are not alone.
Find more information, register as a guest, or leave a review by going to the website 1in3podcast.com. That's the number 1, IN, the number 3, podcast.com. Follow 1 in 3 on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at 1 in 3 podcast. To help me out, please remember to rate, review, and subscribe. 1 in 3 is a .5 Pinoy production. Music written and performed by Tim Crow.